What's up everyone, my name is Mark Hawk, and we're going to try and quickly go over a bunch of action cameras that I'm recommending here in 2015. This will hopefully speed up some of your holiday shopping or just trying to figure out which action camera is right for you. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. So we'll quickly start by taking a look at some of the cheaper options out there. The Xiaomi Yi is definitely the most powerful cheap camera you're going to get. Its strengths are definitely in things like image quality and video quality at 1080p, 30 frames a second. Things like image quality you're also going to be really strong at. We have continued support, so even though it started in a Chinese marketplace, it's definitely adapted into an English marketplace really strongly. We now have a native English app, and it's really easy for anyone to get. You will have to have a smartphone to really use this at strength, but there's definitely a lot of accessories for it, so you can use it in pretty much any scenario. 1080p, 30 frames a second is where it really shines. 60 frames a second is okay. Things like it's 120 frames per second mode at 720p leave a little to be desired, and its low light performance isn't that great, and it has a weird, odd sort of greenish color tint, but in terms of image quality, it's definitely one of the better ones you can get at the cheapest rate, and things like the built-in tripod mount, continued app support, and firmware updates make it a really solid purchase. That just has a few things you might want to consider. I definitely would check out the quick look, but it's definitely not a bad purchase. Just keep in mind it might not be the easiest camera to wrap your head around at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy. The Hero 4 Session has had a weird sort of reception. First off, it's a really good companion camera, so if you already have a GoPro and you're looking for something for a little more coverage, the Hero 4 Session is a great option. Now, if you're thinking this camera isn't cheap, it did start off at $399. It has recently been reduced to $199, which makes it a pretty solid buy. Its image quality is a little bit softer than something you'd get on the higher-end action cameras, such as the Hero 4 Silver or Black, but again, color space-wise, it's going to be a great addition to that. It's waterproof up to 33 feet. It can actually go a little further than that right out of the box with no additional housing. It's definitely one of the smaller ones out there. Great battery life, over 2 hours at 1080p, 30 frames a second. We can push it to 1440p at 30 frames a second without any sort of noticeable image quality loss. Again, built-in Wi-Fi, great phone support. We can download just the raw images to our phone. Not the greatest camera for low light. Again, not the sharpest camera out there. One of the better options there at $199. Keeping in the Cube family, the Polaroid Cube Plus does add a little more functionality at $150 than last year's Polaroid Cube. We have things like Wi-Fi, so we connect it to our smartphone, and that's really the only way we can change the settings on this camera. We can't do anything waterproof at the box without additional housing, and it's not really archival quality footage, but it is going to give us sharper edges and better and more appealing color space than maybe the Hero 4 Session right out of the box. Now, our edges will suffer a little bit since we are crunching those values a little bit more, and we do have some weird grain dancing issues, and the audio quality is kind of poor on this. It could be a really cute gift for a mom or somebody that just wants a cute little camera that they can kind of show off. So if you're looking for something that's really good on video and a $150 price range, I would maybe look at this, but it's maybe not your top choice, but it's definitely in that ball house of being acceptable quality to I wish it was better in some areas. The Hero Plus LCD was one of those cameras when it first came out. I didn't really know who it was built for, and it wasn't until I took a trip down to Florida that I passed this off to my younger cousin, who was really good with an iPad, that was really good with electronics, but had never really had a camera of her own, that she took this really well. We have a touch-based LCD screen on the back, which she took to really easily. It allowed her to be a little more creative with setting up shots because she could see it. She could quickly get in here and with the touch interface quickly change her settings. And since everything is built into this case where we aren't going to lose parts, we don't have to worry about losing batteries because we have an internal battery. We're going to go about 2 hours and 5 minutes at 1080p, 30 frames a second. We can do 1080p, 60 frames a second. She was able to connect it to her iPad at night, download those images to her iPad, and share it with her friends. Again, she's not like super tech savvy, but this was a great camera. It's not going to break. It's not going to be, again, the higher quality that we get out of a Hero 4 or a Sony X1000V, but if you need something that's rugged and has quality that will just hold up for quite a few years, the Hero Plus LCD is a really solid buy. Low light performance not going to be the best, and its price at $299 is a little extreme. You can find it cheaper. It's a really solid buy for someone in that marketplace that is slightly tech savvy and maybe is looking to get their first action camera, but you're kind of worried that they might break it or lose parts. The X1000V is a bit older, but I still think it's one of the cooler small action cameras out there. All the Sony action cameras are tremendously great at low light conditions. They also have built-in digital stabilizers, so things like shaking will be greatly reduced. They have a really wide field of view. In fact, their lens distortion can be a little bit too extreme. I would definitely keep it on steady shot if you're ever going to use it, but even then you're going to notice some warping in the edges. The AZ1 unfortunately doesn't have any sort of waterproof housing that I feel is usable. It comes with a bubble housing, but it's really just for waterproof protection. Anything underwater is going to be super blurry, and you don't have any external microphone options, which would have been really good for people who are doing vlogging on motorcycles. But it's a really small action camera. It's really powerful. Image quality is great, especially day to night. Again, things like low light quality with all the Sony cameras are going to be great compared to anything out there. Our image quality during the day, all of our colors are going to look rich and nice. Now, this isn't the sharpest camera, but it's a great companion camera if you already have a Sony camera. If you want to pick it up by itself, it retails for around $150 to $199, but this holiday season I've seen it as low as like $100 to $125, and I've heard Best Buy is starting to clearance some of these out. It's a solid buy. It's a great companion camera to anyone you might know, or if you have a Sony action camera, it's a great little camera. It's definitely one of the smallest ones in the market, really powerful, has Wi-Fi options. It's a really good camera, except if you're doing underwater stuff, or if you really hate lens distortion. Now, the Garmin Virb-XE has to be one of my sort of favorite cameras from 2015. If you're doing anything with a lot of vehicles, I definitely recommend you look into the Virb-XE and not the Virb-X. The Virb-XE's image quality is definitely in the sort of top of the line area. It does 1440p at 30 frames a second, which has some sort of anti-aliasing issues, but 1080p at 60 frames a second and 1080p at 30 frames per second look great. Now, the reason why it's great for vehicles is because we have a really durable body, but it also has a bunch of built-in internal sensors that are recording things like GPS, rotation, G-force, and a bunch of other stats. And then on top of that, as long as the camera is turned on, it's recording all of that, but you can also connect it to other Garmin devices or other Bluetooth devices or ANT plus devices to record things like heartbeat, or if you need a more powerful GPS signal, something that's a little more accurate, you can connect it to that, and it syncs it with the footage as soon as you start recording it. Now, to record the footage, we actually have a tactile button that we can flip forward so we can feel it through our gloves. It's really nice. If we want to just take photos, we have a dedicated photo button here, and again, depending on how we press this, we can switch from time-lapse to just normal photos. Image quality will be adjusted in low light for photos, so we don't have to worry about sort of touching any settings. Pretty much this camera is really good right out of the box, and it's really powerful. It offers us to have a lot of that sensor data to sync it with the Virb Edit software later. If you're doing anything with vehicles, airplanes, it's a really cool option to have and record all of that data or sync it to more accurate footage. And again, the image quality is really good. Just make sure you get the right micro SD card. I definitely suggest something like a Lexar 633X. It's an XE formatted card, really good. And we're waterproof right out of the box. It is a little bit heavier than other action cameras on the market, and it is a little oddly shaped for helmet mounting, and we can't really do anything to the side. It's got to be upside down or right side up, but it's a really solid buy, and it's definitely one of my favorite ones. However, it's just a little expensive and not the best at low light. $399 is its asking price, but for anything on the market, this one offers some of the most unique options. Now, the Sony AS200V is definitely one of the best all-around action cameras you can get on the market for its price value. It's got, again, like the AZ1, it has digital stabilization, so we can remove a lot of those handheld jitters that otherwise ruin shots. It's definitely one of the most appealing features. On top of that, it does really good low-light functionality. Unlike the AZ1, we can actually get a flat lens for this and make it really good for underwater video and photography. And we can actually change the scene mode to be more underwater, which pumps more red, that forces the camera to balance out colors underwater. The UI LCD screen isn't the best, but we don't need a smartphone to see that sort of stuff. It also has GPS right out of the box, and the sort of color profile that it has, we can switch between a few settings. We can do flat or vivid, but it's going to look really nice right out of the box without any sort of tweaking in our post-production settings. It's just a really nice image right out of the bat. Again, it just has that really extreme lens distortion that you're going to want to look out for, and it has no real field of view options, but it's definitely one of the better price cameras, and the audio quality on this thing's really good. Definitely one of my top recommendations of 2015. The Hero 4 Silver is probably the action camera I've used most between 2014 and 2015. It's a great all-around camera. You'll be hard-pressed to find a scenario where you come home with footage you're disappointed with. You can do settings like 2.7K at 30 frames a second, 1080p at 60 frames a second. I definitely prefer to film at 1440p at 30 frames per second. It just allows me to have a little more top and bottom field of view if I'm doing things like mountain biking or skiing and you're okay with mounting this on your chest. Your chest is going to absorb a lot of those micro vibrations, and it's a really easy camera to mount all around. Image quality is great all around. There are arguments that it's a little bit softer than the Sony action camera, and I definitely do agree with that. It's because we have a wider field of values with the black and white values. We're not crunching those values down. The edges aren't as sharp, and we do have a little more wiggle room in post-production, but again, that is one thing to consider if you don't want to do a lot of post-production work. You're not going to have a bad image with the Hero 4 Silver, but you're definitely going to have a lot more wiggle room and options with it. The added LCD screen on the back makes functionality way easier. We can take long exposure photos, and having the LCD screen to see those results or mess with those results at night, and makes showing people how to use the camera or borrow the camera much easier. And overall, it's one of my top recommended cameras for 2015. It's definitely one of the higher priced cameras at $399, but I'm sure you can find a bargain on it, and it's definitely one of my favorite cameras for 2015. Now, the Hero 4 Black is exactly like the Hero 4 Silver, except it's just got more power to it, and it removes the LCD screen, which is a huge bummer. But we're replacing it with heat sinks because this thing does 4K at 30 frames per second, and the image quality on it is great. We can do 1080p at 120 frames per second, which can make some of your most mundane adventures look like the most amazing thing in the world. Just slowing those down just a little bit looks great. The one area I wish this was a little bit better was low light performance like the Sony action cameras. The Sony action cameras use a backlit image sensor. The Hero 4 Black is definitely for the power user who wants the most power out of their camera. The LCD screen isn't going to be a deterrent to that user because basically anything you point this camera on, it's going to get recorded, and if you know how to use a GoPro action camera, you're going to be just fine. The X1000V is going to be definitely one of the best image qualities out there. It shares the same sort of properties, a digital image stabilizer like the AS200V. We have great low light and night performance, but we're just going to have really sharp edges and a really great color profile right out of the box with little work. It's a little bigger than the other action cameras on the market, and the battery life is going to be a little less, but we can do 4K at 30 frames per second. We can do 1080p at 120 frames per second, and we can actually do 720p at 240 frames per second, and while the Hero 4 Black did patch in that functionality, I did find 720p at 240 frames per second on the Hero 4 Black to be nowhere near as good as it is on this camera. However, this camera is using a much higher bit rate, so keep that in mind that your computer might need to be a little beefier to take full advantage of that, and if it isn't, you're going to need to download a Sony action camera software to kind of sort of give you a lower bit rate version of that and play it back a little bit correctly. And if you're on an Apple computer, I have heard functionality issues with those software, those files on the computer, so just look into that. There might be some codec issues, but again, image quality, if you're doing anything with a lot of shakiness and you want the best quality, this is the camera to go to. If lens distortion bothers you in the slightest, this is going to be a huge issue on this camera, but again, you can turn on steady shot to remove a lot of that, but you're also going to have a lot of warping. Just keep that thing in mind, but again, GPS, stabilization, great color profile, one of the sharpest images on the market today. Last but not least is the DJI Osmo. This is one of my favorite cameras again to use. It's just not as versatile as some of the other action cameras. It's not going to be able to throw it into the same environment some of these other action cameras can be because it's just a lot more vulnerable, and it's going to be a big cost up front. But if you have someone that is very tech savvy and wants something new with a lot of technology that's not in these other cameras, the DJI Osmo offers a 3-axis gimbal. It has connection with the smartphone that's much more versatile than anything else out there. And yeah, there's just a lot of functionality with this camera. It's a lot of fun to play around with, but it's definitely something a little bit newer and a little bit more complicated, but it's going to give you 4K, 30 frames a second with some of the most breathtaking image quality out there. Anyway, I know that was kind of a rushed and low production version of what our recommendations are for 2015, but these are definitely the cameras that I like to play around with all throughout the year. There's definitely a lot more for each of these cameras in our reviews or our quick looks or our side-by-side, so check those out for any ones you thought were interesting. Let me know what you thought in the comments section below. I'm Mark Hawk, and I'll see you guys out there. Have a good one, everyone.